morning, YouTube. It's just after 6 o'clock on Monday morning. I'm on the M6 heading towards Cornwall again. Been on the road for about an hour. And it's raining. So it looks to me like the discussion with It's the Superfly is pretty much at an end now, which I'm quite relieved by, at least my contribution to that. And I feel as if I've got some benefit of hindsight coming on now. Well, because as I say, it's reached its, for me at least, its terminal point. Some quite interesting things in there for me, actually, not so much about the... Well, yeah, to a certain extent about the moral position of Jesus for it, but more about motivations, about why people do things, and my own motivations, I have to say. Perhaps I can just start off by talking about that. Because I guess I can see this now with the benefit of hindsight, but if you had talked to me about this 48 hours ago or 3 days ago, I would not have said this. With the benefit of hindsight, I'm now thinking, how the hell did I get involved in this? You know, a guy makes a video 10 months ago talking in really vague terms about some hypothetical religious situation, and then and I don't know JF, so you know, that's whatever. And then some other guy I don't know, It's the Superfly, makes a video, you know, which appears to me to be attention seeking. You know, normally I wouldn't respond to that. You know, I would normally just recognise that. Oh right, that's the ecology of YouTube, at least in part. That's how it works. Fine. But I would never get involved in that under normal circumstances. It's not a discussion that. I mean, neither the ideas, nor the personalities, nor the other people involved, or anything that I would be even remotely interested in contributing to under normal circumstances. But that's not how it felt at the time, and that's so interesting to me. At the time, I felt, I have to say something about this. I am, if not appalled, then at least I have a desire to be in this and to say the things that need to be said. You know, that's the feeling that's flooding me, which prompted my initial video and the follow-up. But from this position, I can see that whilst the things I said were, you know, kind of do reflect the things I think. You know, I do stand by the incoherent arguments I tried to make, and others which I haven't made. I can recognise now from this distance that wasn't my motivation. My motivation to make those videos in the first place and to get involved in what is, you know, a transparently simple drama of, you know, minuscule proportions, is not to do with because I'm outraged either by Jesus Freak's video or by It's the Superfly's response. I can recognise, with the benefit of hindsight, that I saw someone that I like on YouTube being caught up in that. I'm not going to name names, but somebody I like became kind of caught up in that, and I think suffered as a result. They got hurt. You know, I saw one of my friends being hurt, and that provided the emotional fuel which motivated me to act. But interestingly enough, I don't know, I didn't directly, you know, when I did act, I didn't respond. I didn't act in that. Oh God, it's so hard to explain myself. You know, I didn't act in a way which actually dealt with the upsetment of my friend. I dealt with what I saw as the rational issue that needed to be addressed. You know what I mean? The emotion entirely transferred itself, completely completely opaquely, you know, without my realising that was what was happening, onto this issue. So I become all kind of vehement about Jesus Freak's rights, or about whatever, you know, about the validity of this hypothetical case, all that kind of stuff. But normally I just watched it from a distance. Fascinating, though. You know, because sometimes we don't know our own motivations, do we? I mean, we might. I guess. I don't think I've done this. I'll have to review this again in a few days' time. I mean, I don't think I've been engaged in post hoc rationalisations, but I might have done. Post hoc rationalisation is when you tailor your responses, you tailor your arguments to match your emotions. You know what I mean? Like, I feel there is something bad happening, therefore I reconstruct the argument to make it look rationally bad. I don't think I did that, but again, I'm not completely transparent to myself, so I'll have to have another look at that again. But I'm sure not the only one. I mean, I don't want to continue the discussion particularly, but I think It's the Superfly, you, Todd, if you haven't watched this video, which I doubt you will because it's to be a long one, may have done the same. I'm not inside your head, so I couldn't guarantee that. But certainly it looked that way. You know, you're ringing CPS. I mean, you didn't ring CPS at the outset, fair enough. And, you know, all the signs were that you didn't ring CPS until a certain critical mass of people had said, oh, you'll lose your integrity if you don't, or you have to do it, record it. You know, it seemed like from the outside that it was only when a critical mass of people had made those kind of statements to you and put you in a position where to not ring CPS would have meant you lost face. It's only then that you did it. In fact, I think in one of the video comments sections you said something like, don't call my bluff, or something like that, which is absolutely of that order, isn't it? It's of that kind of thing. Now, of course, I might be completely wrong, and you did follow, you know, the logical and emotionally logical pathways that would lead a person from outrage to action, solely focused only on the actual moment of injustice or moment of danger that you perceived. But from the outside, it certainly looked like at least some of the motivation was to do with face saving. But you wouldn't know that any more than I know it, you know what I mean? I'm sure it felt to you completely justified, just like it felt to me completely justified to make those responses. But like I say, I might be wrong, I don't know. Maybe I'm over psychoanalyzing. Yeah, we're not transparent to ourselves, are we? I've just gone past the service station and now I've hit a queue. I'm just around about Birmingham. Big mistake that, because I'm dying for a piss. I should have pulled off at the services. Hope it's not too big a queue. I think, like a lot of atheists, I've got this massive man crush on Richard Dawkins. You know, he's such an eloquent speaker. He's so sophisticated looking, you know. And I don't know. He did that fantastic series of Royal Society lectures for children back in the 70s or 80s, something like that, where he's wearing these really wild floral shirts. He looks brilliant. He's married to Lalla Ward, who was one of Doctor Who's assistants. So it's all good, you know what I mean? It's all good. And his books are fantastic. You know, what I think he's really good at in his books, which is why I think he deserved the Simonyi Chair for the Public Understanding of Science, which he had until relatively recently, is because he's so good at spinning metaphors and putting figurative speech and using rhetoric. You know, those images that he's got, you know, of climbing Mount Improbable, the river out of Eden, the blind watchmaker, all these really concise images. If you've got the image, you know, everything in those books just kind of attaches to the image really well. The selfish gene, you know, you get that. I mean, it's a poetic image, you know what I mean? It is poetic. He himself says it's poetic. And like all poetry, of course, it's open to misinterpretation, but it works so well at conveying images and cohering complex bodies of knowledge together into recognisable shapes that I think it's just superb the way he does that. I think he does. I think there are some problems with it. I mean, selfish gene has been a problem. He himself has gone to some lengths to stress exactly what he meant by that, you know, because it's often completely misread to say that selfish genes make selfish people, and that's not what he's talking about. So as I say, it does have to sometimes qualify that. And the other one, which is the one I'm thinking about right now, is the comment he makes in God Delusion, where he's talking about the indoctrination of children. You know, he shows this picture of a Muslim child, a Christian child, a Hindu child from the newspaper. He's talking about the indoctrination of children, how weird it is that we say things like that. And then he compares it analogically to child abuse. I stress it's a comparison. He's widely misquoted as saying that indoctrination of children is child abuse. He doesn't actually say that, and he's distanced himself from that suggestion. But it does appear in the same paragraph, and it's an analogue. But it's a very effective analog, you know, for the same reasons, I think. You know, it reframes religious education of children. It reframes it in a way which just allows it to be looked at in a completely different way. I mean, that's what poetic reframing is for. And as I say, he's a master at that kind of stuff. But I do think there's some fallout, you know, particularly if people overread that or read it too literally, don't recognise that he's using figurative language for rhetorical effect. You know, in the same way that if you look at selfish genes, oh right, that's why people are selfish, because they've got selfish genes. In the same way that if you misread that, it leads to stupid conclusions. Then I think misreading this analogy of child abuse and child indoctrination, indoctrination of children with religions, the same thing happens. You know, because child abuse is very specific. It's defined in law. It's pretty well defined in terms of social systems for dealing with it. It's very accurately understood, or relatively accurately understood in kind of vernacular understanding. We kind of know what we mean when we're talking about it, which is why it works as such a potent metaphor. But I think if people start confusing religious indoctrination with the real thing of child abuse, that becomes a problem. And Dawkins himself has distanced himself from that. As I said, you know, he's not for a moment suggesting that the legal definition of child abuse should apply to religious belief, or indeed the utterances of religious authorities, or the things it says in the Bible. You know, these things might be deplorable for all kinds of reasons, but he is very careful to say that it's not illegal. Yes. I did try to start a thread about this actually on Richard Dawkins' website, because I'm on the forums there, and as I'm sure many other atheists are. But the forums all changed on Richard Dawkins' website about a year ago. I don't know, I'm sure people know this, because they used to be relatively open, but now all comments have to be checked first and moderated, and you know, threads have to be checked first, and it takes bloody ages. So I don't think my thread on that has even been looked at yet. Yeah, religious indoctrination is not child abuse. It's just stupid. Actually, let me just add something on to the end of that. Religious indoctrination is not just stupid, as I said. I think it is a problem. But it's a problem in the same way that ideological indoctrination is a problem. Yeah. It can be a problem. Yeah, I think that's all. Okay, I know I said I wasn't going to make any Jesus freak comments, but I can't help it. It's just so interesting. One of the things I found really interesting is, you know, Jesus freak said this stuff, if his God told him to do this act, kill his kid, that he hopes he would have the strength to be obedient. But the people who are criticising him on this, as I think I'm right in saying, are almost exclusively people like myself, atheists. I don't know, maybe there are some religious people out there, Christians, perhaps of different denominations, or of the same denominations, who are criticising, or have in the past criticised JF, because it is a while back, isn't it, he said this. But I'm not hearing that, or it's not obvious. It's most obvious that atheists are doing this. But the weird thing for me about this is, atheists don't believe in God. So it's the equivalent of someone saying, if the flying spaghetti monster, if the flying spaghetti monster told me to kill my children, I would. I think I can probably say that now, actually, because I've got kids. If the flying spaghetti monster told me to kill my kids, I would. There, I'm on record as saying that. Because there is no flying spaghetti monster, and there is no God. So, you know, us atheists are worried. Well, yeah, okay. Yeah, we're worried about something that can't possibly be happened by our own beliefs. Our beliefs should tell us that can't possibly happen. It's the Christians who do believe it could possibly happen, but are perhaps of a more moderate frame of mind, who should be jumping up and down saying, no, don't do it. You didn't mean that. Or something, whatever. Yeah, it's not going to happen, is it? Because there's no God. Of course, I mean, some people are saying, well, it's a different, you know, what if he snaps? But I think I've already talked about that in a different video, you know what I mean? We're not talking about a violent, mentally ill episode. We're just not. That's different, isn't it? That different, completely different. That. Do you hear me, God? Flying spaghetti monster? I am your servant. Tell me to kill my children. I will torture them first, if you like. Yeah. Riders on the storm. Take a long holiday. One of the interesting things about rabbits, or about the brains of rabbits specifically, is that the right and left side of their brain isn't connected up in anything like the same extent that ours is, that humans are, and many other animals are, including the right and left sides of their visual systems. And what that means is that you can, well, in a way, the right side of a rabbit's brain knows something different to the left side of a rabbit's brain. And that even works to the level of association, I think. I'm pretty right. I'm not remembering this exactly right in this experiment, so the details might be slightly off. But I think I'm right in saying you can do this. That you can set up a stimulus response, a conditioning response with a rabbit using one of its eyes. Let's say you take a rabbit's left eye and you flash a red light, so only its left eye sees that response. Or maybe it's its left visual field. Anyway, it's left. Let's say it's left eye and he sees that flash of light. You can associate that flash of light, a flash of red light, with something positive. So you flash the light, give it a food pellet. You do that a few times using these normal reward systems, and eventually the rabbit will associate implicitly the flash of the red light with something positive. And every time it sees that, it'll, I don't know, depress a lever, or it'll walk through a certain door expecting there to be a food pellet there, that kind of thing. But with the same rabbit, you can set up a completely opposite response using the other eye, because the systems aren't connected up. So I can't remember which eye I said now. Let's say that was the left eye. With the right eye, you can flash a red light in its right eye and associate that with a negative response. So you give it a little electric shock or something like that. And again, that built up very quickly. Once that response is built up, regular as clockwork, you flash the red light and in the right eye this time, and the rabbit will cower, will shrink away from it. But it doesn't destroy the original association. You switch back to the red light in the left eye and it'll press the bar expecting a food pellet again. It's almost as if there's two things going on in there. Yeah, I guess it's in a sense the rabbit's consciousness isn't complete in the way that ours is, isn't singular and unified the way that we think ours is. I think we should say think ours is rather than is. You know, it's able to hold two completely incompatible associations in one brain simultaneously. It's so interesting, though. I think it's funny that even the most rational amongst us, and I'm not necessarily saying that includes me, by the way, is really tempted to go in for this idea that thought and action are related. Let me just explain what I mean by that. People get very morally outraged, or some people get very morally outraged, not just when somebody does a bad thing, obviously that's appropriate, but when they think about it. You know, there's certain thoughts which, if you entertain the thought, just the thought alone, that's considered to be a bad thing. Now that's got to be a superstition, or it's got to be a bit of bad science which associates the likelihood of committing an act with the thinking of that act, or something like that. Or it's got to be, I think it's magical thinking. I think deep down inside, most of us have this sense that thought is itself a kind of action in the world, and can change circumstances in the world negatively or positively. I think somewhere deep inside us, even the most rational, atheistic, reasonable, scientific, positivist, whatever, still has some belief in, you know, magical thinking. I'll just give a couple of examples for that, and yeah, I'm not sure these are entirely valid, but the one that jumps out at me really is thinking thoughts which, if you carried them out, would be immoral, or would break some taboo. And I'm thinking of things like having sex with a close relative, for example. Having sex with a close relative. I mean, I would invite, if anybody watches this video, and these are long videos, so I understand if nobody does, but if you are watching this video, I would just invite you to try imagining having sex with a close relative right now. And what you'll find is, if you're anything like me, is that you'll go there a little bit, and then you'll kind of feel yourself being repelled by the thought. And the closer the detail you get, you find yourself being able to imagine, the more difficult it gets, the more repellent you will find the thought. You know, your whole kind of mind will recoil from that thought, it seems. Which is so interesting, isn't it? And there's other things as well, you know, things to do with violence. Committing violence against a loved one. You go there and you're repelled by it. And other things to do with, not so much moral, but things to do with disgust. And I mean physical disgust, not moral disgust. You know, like smearing dog excrement in your hair. I don't know why it's always in the hair, but people find that very difficult. Imagining that too closely, people find really repellent. In fact, I used to know a guy, and things to do with blood actually. I used to know a guy who was really sensitive bloke, very funny, and he could talk about pretty much anything. But if he ever thought himself talking and thinking about blood, you know, like a cut or a surgical operation, he would just fall over in a dead faint. Couldn't do it. Not only his mind repelled from that thought, and he would say, please don't talk about that, I find it really hard. But at a certain point, his body would just shut down at the prospect. You know, there's some things which our minds just retreat from. And I'm sure most of it's for good evolutionary reasons, or some kind of social evolutionary reason, or something like that. You know, there's a good reason why we have a taboo against playing with feces, for example, or having sex with a close relative. There's good reasons why we've got those taboos. But it's so interesting that taboo isn't just about the action. It's caught up in word magic and thought magic. So just talking about it, just my ability to talk about this now, I imagine, some people would find that problematic. Just my ability to voice these words, some people would find difficult. And the idea of thinking these things is difficult for pretty much all of us. And you can't get past it. I mean, one of the things about training for artists, I mean, I work in theatre, so it has a relationship. For training for artists, performers, creative writers, this kind of thing, is the necessity pretty early on to get past most of that. You know, in something like improvised comedy, for example, which is I know everybody will know about. One of the very first things you learn is how not to meet a block, you know, and not to be blocked by your own inherent sense of moral outrage, by the mind's inherent recoiling from certain material. Because when you're doing improvisation, you don't want a mind that recoils, you want a mind that just flows, that just goes anywhere, that's fearless, that knows that talking and thinking is inherently safe, and it's only actions that are dangerous. At least that's the idea. I mean, you could argue about political thoughts being dangerous, political ideas being dangerous, but certainly when you're trying to generate ideas, you don't want a mind that recoils, you want a mind that feels like it's flowing freely, whatever that means. And the ones that people usually recoil from when they're in the early stages of learning how to improvise are things like the ones I've mentioned. You know, particular sexual practices, areas which suggest disgust, areas to do with violence, and some areas to do with religion. People often recoil from religious thought. I'm not quite sure what that's about. But it is so interesting, isn't it, that? We're not supposed to entertain those ideas. Actually, related to that, actually, and this is to do with not what it feels like personally, to be able to move past the point where you're not frightened of the thoughts inside your own head. You're not committing yourself just by thinking something, or just by saying something. You know, you're not committing something by saying something out loud or writing it down. One of the things associated with that is some really interesting research that was carried out about morality and the perception of another person's morality. I think it's Jonathan Haidt who writes a lot about morality who cited this. I'll see if I can find the reference. It's an example I mentioned before a while back, but it's a hypothetical case to do with hospital administrators. Hospital administrator has a certain budget to spend, and he can spend this budget either on improving the appearance of the hospital, giving it a lick of paint and improving the signage, or he can spend it on life-saving operations for some of the patients. That's fairly straightforward. Now, what you do is you present that scenario to two groups of people. In one group of people, you say to them, okay, hospital administrator is faced with this choice, and he immediately decides to spend the money on the patients. Yeah? And then you ask them to judge the morality of this hospital administrator, and they usually judge it quite high, because he's immediately spent it on what they consider to be the right place. The second group of people, you present exactly the same scenario, but you say, this hospital administrator presented with this choice thinks about it for a while, and then spends the money on life-saving operations for patients. So the outcome is exactly the same. The action is exactly the same. The only thing that's changed in the presentation of this to the second group is you've said that the hospital administrator thinks about it. And that second group, mark, again evaluating this perceived morality, mark him quite a bit lower than the first group. We don't like our morality, the people we judge to be moral, we don't like those people to have to think about certain things. We like it automatic. We don't like them thinking about things. Thinking itself is perceived as either a precursor to an immoral act, or as increasing the likelihood of the immoral act being what we see as an immoral act taking place. Which is bullshit. Bullshit. But it's pretty significant, I think. I can't resist mentioning Jesus Freak again at this point. I think some of the moral outrage against Jesus Freak is a similar kind of thing, really. The fact that he was willing to entertain the thought. I think a fairly, because he didn't actually said yes, he just said he hoped he would have the strength to be obedient. But it's the fact that he thought about it. We don't like people thinking about those things. We like our morality neat and unadulterated by rational or any kind of thought, really. Yeah. I wasn't going to say any more on this, but I just got this to add, really, about this, would you kill your kids if God told you to? I mean, some of the comments that people have made in various videos, and I can't name names because there's too many to mention, I've just said, I wouldn't do it, I'd tell God to fuck off. No, you fucking wouldn't. Right? I mean, really, it's bullshit, and it's macho bullshit, and it's bravado. I mean, just look at the history around the world of people doing much worse than that, not because God told them to, but because some dictator told them to, or because they were scared, or because they were being tortured, or because the alternatives were even worse. People do that shit when they're put under pressure. And you don't need that much pressure. You really don't. If I was to waterboard you right now, waterboarding takes to the edge of your own death. That's how it works, yeah? Takes to the edge of your own death, so most of your brain shuts down, and the only thing that's running is the systems that are life support systems and panic reactions, that's it. You get a glimpse of death. If I was to waterboard you right now, after about 12 seconds, because most people can stand is between 14 and 17 seconds, after about 12 seconds, every part of your brain would have shut down apart from the need to survive. And if I had a button there in front of you right now and said, this will stop if I press this button but your kid will die, you would hit that button so hard, every single one of you would hit that button so hard. And that's just some guy with a bucket of water and a cloth, can get you to kill your own kid. And we're talking about God here, the architect of the entire universe. So really, all this shit about, I would tell God to fuck off. I would tell God to fuck off. Yeah, right. Just thinking again about these rabbits. And now rabbits, have got this vision brain thing where the right half of the brain doesn't know what the left half of the brain knows. So their consciousness isn't complete. It's fragmented, and different parts of their mind know different things, and they don't necessarily connect up. I'm just thinking, in a sense, I think all of us are like that. I mean, I'm certainly like that. There's a lot of inconsistencies and incoherencies, I think, in thought. I mean, I'm not saying there's necessarily that the universe is incoherent and inconsistent, although it might be. And I'm not saying I don't think that a decent scientific description of the world is necessarily incoherent and inconsistent. But I think that where we think about those things and talk about those things does contain a lot of inconsistencies and a lot of incoherencies. You know, the way we talk about things like morality, I think, is in some ways incompatible with the way we talk about evolutionary history, or is incompatible with the way we talk about ideology and politics, and that again is incompatible, I think, in the way we talk about in our emotional lives, and is incompatible with the way we talk about, you know, the kind of monetary system that we operate within. You know, there's this huge disjunctions in this kind of stuff, I think, which we try to smooth over. But I think if you drop beneath the surface, you can see a lot of the inconsistencies there and the incoherencies there. And a bit like a rabbit's brain, I suppose the difference with us, I don't know if this is a difference or not, is that we do seem to have this. It doesn't feel like that. You know what I mean? If we were to be as inconsistent as rabbits appear to be in their likes and dislikes and their positive and negative reactions to things, and the way that their associative networks are built up, if we were as if it was evident to us that we were as inconsistent as that, then it would be a problem. But it isn't evident. You know what I mean? It's almost as if there's something papering over the cracks, or some some overarching fiction which contains all of these different things, almost if it's built out of those inconsistencies. And I think there's an argument that consciousness is an example of that. You know, could be that very thing. You know, that rather than consciousness, human consciousness, being this kind of smooth, transparent, glowing space, which I think we kind of imagine it to be, that it's actually a set of frictions and tensions and fractures and breaks and diffractions and skyhooks and justifications and all those kind of accommodations we'd need to make to resolve the inconsistencies. Do you know what I mean? To resolve the inconsistencies between all of that, those separate differences. I think we're all like rabbits, but with stories, storytelling rabbits. Maybe we're storytelling rabbits. Self-deluded rabbits. Rabbits that are deluded by the sense of a self. Maybe that's what we are. There's a service that's coming up in 1.5 miles, thank God, because I thought my bladder was going to burst. Just thinking about drama on YouTube, in the general sense, not in the particular. Because obviously it's just used as a term, a pejorative term to mean a variety of different things, isn't it? But I think there's some specific things about it as well which are interesting, because in some ways it does have some relationship to drama in the outside world. I mean, real drama, the kind of stuff that students study when they're doing drama studies or theatre studies or performance studies. You know, it can be analysed in those terms. But there's also some significant differences, and the differences which are brought about by the state of the medium, I think. And I think there's some quite interesting stuff there, really. I mean, the one I'm thinking about so far, this is the kind of thing I should write about, actually, but I don't. The thing I'm thinking about so far is the idea of dramatic irony. Now, I don't really do much in the way of dramatic irony in my job, because I'm mostly in contemporary theatre and performance art and experimental theatre, and there's not very much dramatic irony in that kind of work. But classically understood, dramatic irony is a plot device in which the audience knows more about what's happening than the characters on the stage or in the film or whatever. So the classic being something like Oedipus. The story of Oedipus by Sophocles. Oedipus, who is banished from the kingdom, returns to the kingdom years later, meets an old man on the road, kills him, goes into the city, meets this attractive, mature woman and marries her, and it's only later on that he finds out that he's actually killed his father and married his mother. Now he finds that out later on, but you know it, as the audience member, you know it much earlier, so you can kind of see the inevitability unrolling. And it's right across a lot of them. It's in all the Shakespeare stuff. It's a common feature, and it's one of the ways that drama produces its effects. The audience knows things that the characters don't. Dramatic irony. But in terms of drama on YouTube, I think there is a way that dramatic irony works, about how one player in the dramatic game doesn't know things that other people who are participants or observers of that drama know. But it's not that complete obliviousness that you get in theatre and film and TV sometimes. What I think you get instead is a kind of complexity and a kind of excess of knowledge, an excess of information that stops the protagonists in a drama knowing what's going on. So, for example, I don't want to name specific examples, but typically what will happen here on YouTube, correct me if I'm wrong, is that somebody will say something, somebody will, make a comment about someone's personal life, or say that they've said something, and then there'll be a whole flurry of activity around it, of personal messages being revealed, of Skype conversations being opened up, of someone else giving a different interpretation of what that Skype conversation was about, of this other video which was deleted used to say, and then a screenshot of some comment that's since been deleted. There'll be all this kind of information around, which kind of separates the protagonists, the people who are involved in the drama, from really knowing what's going on. It's not that they're oblivious to it. It's not that they're oblivious to knowledge. It's not like Oedipus in the play. It's not that he's. It's not in that story he's oblivious to the fact that he's murdered his father and he's married his mother. It's not like that. It's just this whole cloud of obfuscating detail and complexity and multiplicity. Dozens of scores or possibly even hundreds of people talking about it in all kinds of different ways, scattered across a dozen different conversations on different videos. So there's no way for any one individual, any of those protagonists, to really get through that thicket, that forest of competing and conflicting information to get to the actual story. You know what I mean? You can't get to the story, not because you don't know the story, not because the story is hidden from you, not because you're oblivious to the story, but because there is so much information going backwards and forwards, there's so much traffic. It's a different kind of dramatic irony, a different kind of separation from the truth, or from a separation, or a different kind of exclusion from being involved in the knowledge about one's own actions. I just want to return to this rabbit again, the rabbit with the divided brain, and this idea that consciousness, human consciousness, might be the shatterings and the fragmentations and the attempt to repair the things that have been broken, as Laurie Anderson says, in that fragmented, dissociated, incoherent set of ideas that a rabbit has in mind, and maybe we have in mind too. I just want to return to that because I'm struck by this quotation from Susan Sontag. I've been thinking about it for a couple of weeks now, and I've been trying to figure out what to do with it. And she begins this essay. The essay is called "The Aesthetics of Silence," which is a really nice little essay, and it's in a book called "Styles of Radical Will" from 1967, so it's old. But she begins that essay. I should just contextualise this. The Aesthetics of Silence is a really beautiful little essay, and it's about, as the name implies, it's about silence and about aesthetics. But it's also about the spiritual in art, which is a very problematic term. But so what she's basically saying is that thing we used to call spirituality in religion a lot of the function of that spirituality is taken up by art. I would almost entirely disagree with that, but it's interesting what she's saying. But she begins it with this quotation about spirituality, and she says that every generation has to reinvent spirituality in its own terms. She says that. So if you're living a previous generation's version of spirituality, like an old religion, something like that, then you're probably not doing the spiritual thing, really. You have to invent it in your own terms. And then she says that spirituality is our ongoing attempt, I can't get the exact words, but it's our ongoing attempt to resolve the inherent incompatibilities or inconsistencies, resolve the inherent inconsistencies in the human condition. So the human I guess it's what I just said, actually, thinking about it. The human condition brings with it inherent conflicts, incompatibilities, inconsistencies, and our need to resolve that in some way, to feel that we don't live in a broken world, that we live in a whole world, and we ourselves are whole. The project to do that she calls spirituality. And previous generations might have done that by using certain kinds of religious, what came to be called religious practices or whatever. But to stay in those and assume those are doing the job is outside of is not in the spirit of the spirit, if you know what I mean. But the last line of that, which I think is really great actually, which again has been kind of haunting my language, is that she says, as I say, every generation has to reinvent spirituality for itself. Spirituality being the need to resolve the inherent resolve the inherent contradictions in the human condition. And then she says, and the completion of consciousness. The consciousness, the implication being, is incomplete. Like in a rabbit, I guess. It's incomplete. But our attempt to do, our need to do that, or the drive that we have to do that, or the functionality we have to do that, and to complete consciousness is what she calls spirituality. But I say it's completely divested of any of the historical baggage. It's just about recognising that the world as we perceive it is, as we talk about it, is a bit broken. Yeah, I think that's it really. I'll have to think some more about that. All these conversations about religion and morality and God and so on that I've been involved with over the last few days gave me an idea for a number of these little these videos I sometimes make without talking, the silent videos where I do some kind of action. So I'll just show you the prop I made in the garage yesterday. Look. Big Jesus-y cross, look. So you'll be seeing that in a video soon, I think. Maybe more than one, I don't know yet. So that should be fun, won't it? Okay, back to spirituality again. Here I'm thinking again about the Sontag, that spirituality, nothing to do with religion, at least the way I'm talking about it. It's this project, the inevitable project that we all have to try to resolve the inherent contradictions in the human condition. But the human condition, including the condition of what we can know and what we can find satisfying about what we know, all those things build in inherent contradictions, and the only way we can resolve those is by this thing called spirituality, which changes according to time and circumstance. It seems to me that most of the religions, and why religion and spirituality have got locked up together like that in this way, is because most of the religions have the same method of resolving those contradictions. And I guess those were the only method that was around, when they were invented 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, which is really to do with personification and narrative. If you want to know why the stars are doing that weird thing where they wheel across the sky at night, you turn them into people and you tell stories about them, Or if you want to know where the Earth came from, you turn it into populate it with people and tell a story about it. If you want to know what happens after you die, you create a cast of characters and you tell a story about it. So all the difficult questions and the irresolvable questions, the contradictions to do with good behaviour versus rational behaviour, to do with all of the, as I say, the contradictions, they're kind of resolved through narrative. You know, so you have to. Why is there evil in the world? Is an inherent contradiction, isn't there? You know, if you've already done this thing of creating a good God, you're a Zoroastrian or something, and then you need to explain the presence of evil in the world. Well, you have to create an extra character to account for it. You know, so you wheel in the devil to account for that or something. So it's a kind of narrative way of explaining the world. We don't do narratives anymore, or at least that's. Well, actually, I guess if you're still religious, then I guess you're still using some kind of a narrative means to explain the world. And in a sense, there's very little point in trying to persuade religious people not to do that. Because if what I said earlier is true, that this is also the method by which we use to complete consciousness, then it's like saying to someone, stop being conscious. You know, they can't, because you're looking at their consciousness. So you would have to replace that with something else. And I suppose not the dominant one, but the one that's most authenticated, most validated by at least most rational people, is something like science. You know what I mean? We try to resolve the contradictions in the world and the unknowns through scientific means. You know, through trying to find higher orders of explanation. You know, if two scientific truths appear to be in conflict with one another and contradict one another, then you try and find a higher order of explanation which resolves the contradiction, don't you? That's how you do it. And that's the nearest thing we have right now to that project. You know, it's a spiritual project. But it seems to me that, you know, if we were willing to entertain the idea that spirituality, that science is spiritual in that sense, it's still got a lot of baggage around it. And I think that, you know, this kind of baggage to do with narrative and baggage to do with characters, personalities. And I think a lot of that is the fault of ourselves and the fault of scientists. I mean, I was watching one of Thunderfoot's videos the other day. As a champion of science and reason here on YouTube, and it was the one where he's responding to Venom Fang X and talking about how wonderful scientific knowledge was, and he goes into the heart of the atom and the Large Hadron Collider and flies through space and talks about this in very kind of hyperbolic terms. But that whole mode of expression and that journey that takes you through is essentially a narrative one, populated by the passions of characters. That's kind of what drives the story forward. That's why it makes it feel, well, you know, if you buy into that kind of thing, that's why it feels meaningful. You know, it's using the tools of narrative and the tools of characters, which have, you know, emotional responses, to drive what is essentially a scientific story forward, which isn't even a story. So it's funny that, isn't it? So even though we're not being technically religious, we're still using the same narrative tools as religion to paper over the cracks in our understanding or something. Yeah. I think people are not going to like me using the word spirituality. I think, Gary, if you watch this video, you'll probably stop by this point. I've had apoplexy. I've got apoplexy yet, Gary, because I've used the word spirituality. Take it in your stride, mate. Go on. Have a go. Okay, I'm still thinking about spirituality and spirit, but here I want to just see if I can get behind the word spirit and the concept, to see if I can unpack that a wee bit. And I'm thinking about it in terms of metaphorical substances. This is something I haven't talked about for ages, but I did make a bunch of videos about this about a year and a half ago. And it's to do with knowledge as well, really, because when we think about knowledge, you know, just knowing stuff, what we usually do is we usually deploy a metaphor there, and it's a substance metaphor. We like to imagine knowledge as ideally as something that's hard, well-bounded, permanent, unmoving, unchanging, something like a rock. You know, I know that sounds daft, but I think a lot of the way we conceptualize an ideal article of knowledge is like that. You know, something that resembles a kind of rock in our heads. Battle of Hastings, 1066. There it is, solid. You know, you can take it out and give it to somebody else, and they've got the rock that says 1066 on it as well. You know, it's like that. Now, not all knowledge is like that. I mean, it might be ideally like that, prototypically like that, I would suggest. But knowledge, I know all knowledge is like that at all. Knowledge that comes from things like the social sciences, what's sometimes called the soft sciences. Listen to that word, soft science. Knowledge that comes from the soft sciences, it tends not to be like that. It's much more fragile. If you handle it roughly, it'll break. It's not clearly bounded. It doesn't transfer easily. You can't move it from one place to another without it changing. You know, it has those kind of characteristics. So it's much more like jelly, or like a liquid, maybe, that kind of thing. Doesn't say it doesn't exist, although people who work in the hard sciences would say that the soft sciences don't produce real knowledge. I would say it is real knowledge. It just doesn't have the same metaphorical hardness. It's a metaphorically different kind of substance, imaginatively speaking. So what's that got to do with spirituality? Well, I think in a sense, if prototypical knowledge, the thing that we're trying to gain, the thing we're trying to put together like building blocks to make an edifice of all the sum total of human knowledge, like a really huge building, if that's the goal, then we have to recognise that these individual nuggets of knowledge, these little rocks of knowledge, and even some of the soggiest stuff, they're incompatible. They're like bits of Tetris. They don't fit together terribly well. It makes buildings which are unstable sometimes. It kind of teeters a lot. There's a lot of that stuff goes on with the way that knowledge puts together. You know, when you put the facts together, they don't really add up to a perfect, you know, they don't make a perfect building. They're a bit shaky. So how do you make sense of all that? Well, I think we conceptualise this other stuff. This is, you know, just metaphorically speaking, figuratively speaking, but our minds are figurative. So we conceptualise this other stuff, which is a bit like substance, but it's even less solid than the soggy stuff of social sciences. It's even more volatile than the kind of knowledge that would be produced by something like psychology or psychoanalysis. It's even more evanescent than the kind of knowledge which would be produced by something like oh god, I can't even think of anything, but you know, a really speculative set of ideas, visions, let's say. I mean, it's so volatile, so evanescent, that it's almost not there at all. It's almost just like the space itself. It's almost just like a force of attraction, devoid of any material component at all. But it needs to be there to keep the building up. You know, if there wasn't any space to hold the building up, for the building to be in, then there wouldn't be a building. Or maybe it's like the mortar that holds these bricks together. Or maybe it's like the buttresses that you hold against the outside to shore it up. You know, it has those kind of qualities, I think. So I think, imaginatively speaking, this idea of spirituality, as the the need to resolve inherent contradictions in the human condition and complete consciousness, it has that kind of metaphorical or figurative quality. Yeah, the rocks and the blocks and the bricks are the idealized prototypical elements of knowledge that make up our world, and then there's the necessary stuff around it, the sides of it, that we use to shore it up, and that's the spirit. I had a video a couple of days ago about how a society, an entire culture, could be racist, for example, or sexist, and how that might show itself up in the implicit dissociation test. I'm just thinking some more about that, because it's going to be confused, I think, because there might be other tendencies, implicit in tendencies, which are nothing to do with the society or the culture in which we're raised, but which are just part of what it is to be a living being, which would feed into that. So, for example, I mean, it seems to me quite likely that all animals, including humans, are naturally what we would call xenophobic. I mean, that would be a logical thing for an animal to be, by which I mean fearing and perhaps having a tendency towards being aggressive towards people who are not like itself. I mean, certainly the history of the human race is a history of xenophobia, but animals are like that too. You know, they get very protective about their own kind, and they tend to be quite aggressive to competitor species particularly. So you know, that would have nothing to do with culture. That would precede culture. But what would the role of culture be in that? You know, if here we all are naturally xenophobic, so all us white-faced guys are all kind of naturally a bit nervous about black-faced guys, what would be the role of society in that? Would its role be to reflect that? Would its role be to try to ameliorate that, to act as a kind of prophylactic, to minimise that, you know, show lots of good role models of men with black faces? Would its role be to just ignore it? You know, would it try and keep hands off and say that's none of our concern, which we shouldn't try to tamper with that? But with the full knowledge that if it doesn't tamper with it, then it's reinforcing natural xenophobia, if natural xenophobia exists. I don't know. I guess that would be a matter for public policy and discussion, wouldn't it? You know, if you wanted to live in a society where xenophobia was not a factor, then you might have to make a culture in which the opposite was in place. You know, it'd be the role of culture to teach us how not to be naturally xenophobic. I think that would be the case. It'd all be a bit PC. People would say, "Oh, this is very PC. This is very politically correct." That's how that would be the criticism. It's being politically correct. But there's no wrong with being politically correct, is there? I mean, I know it's used as a pejorative, but it's not really a pejorative, is it? Politically correct means, you know, doing the right thing, really, isn't it? So yeah, maybe it's absolutely necessary, if we are naturally xenophobic, to have a society which tries to counter that natural xenophobia with some unnatural equality. Yeah. To rebuild our naturally occurring implicit associations in a different manner. I'd really like to do another experiment in Bunnyvision, but you need two cameras to do it, and an editing software program that does more than mine does. So if anybody's got two cameras that are the same, like two flips or two similar cameras like that, flips are ideal, I think, and ideally they've also got a piece of software that will allow them to overlay the two footages, and you could do something for me, I'd really appreciate it. What I'd like you to do is basically to put the two cameras back to back, you know, tape them together or just hold them together, and then just move around like that, you know. So I'm trying to, and then when you've done that, what you should get, of course, is two pieces of footage, just 30 seconds or a minute or so, two pieces of footage that are of opposite sides, yeah? And then what I'd like you to do, if you're up for it, is put them into the editing suite and just reduce the transparency on the top layer to 50% so that it shows the other side through, you know what I mean? So you get an overlay, so the two things are superimposed perfectly, you know, so the timing is perfect. If anybody fancies doing that, that'd be great, because that's a kind of a reproduction of what I see when I look through this Bunnyvision contraption that I made. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll try and remember to leave a link to where I describe it and show you. Basically it's two mirrors like this, you know, so one eye's looking that way and one eye's looking the other, a bit like the way that rabbits do. What you get is this weird superimposed vision of the world in which it's all like this, you know. And I'd like to convey an impression of what that looks like, and I think if someone could do that with two cameras in the way I've described, it'll give that impression. You won't get the feeling of motion that goes with it, unfortunately, but at least you get the visual effect. So yeah, that's a straightforward request to anybody who's got two similar cameras and a few minutes of time with an editing suite. Thanks very much, goodbye. I've just been listening to Radio 4 podcast of a programme called In Our Time with Melvin Bragg. It's a really, if you don't know it, it's a really great discussion, lots of big discussion on Radio 4, BBC Radio 4. and this particular one was on Maimonides, who I'd heard of but didn't really know anything about. It's a Jewish scholar, and it was really interesting and kind of timely to listening to this, because it was talking about his work and how he lived in Egypt, in Cairo and different places, and what the climate of the intellectual life was like then, with Muslim, Christian and Jewish scholars all apparently in a fairly healthy intellectual mix, and that was pretty interesting stuff. But then he started talking about his works, and one thing he said his most famous work was a piece called A Guide to the Perplexed, which I'll have to look at. It's bound to be available online. And the people they were talking to, which was John Haldane and then two other people I didn't recognise the names of, was talking about who were these perplexed people that Maimonides is supposedly talking to. And he said, well, it's not people who are ignorant of scripture or ignorant of philosophy, burgeoning science. It's not those people. It's the people who are it's the educated perplexed he's talking about, he said. It's people who have started to find something out about philosophy, or have found a great deal out about philosophy, but recognise that it's in contradiction to scripture, or that one piece of scripture is in contradiction to another piece of scripture. People who are using their intellect, and the cracks are starting to show in the what I guess should be the kind of smooth surface of the world and the intellect around that world. Because these things are in contradiction many of the time, and so Maimonides' Guide to the Perplexed is a bit addressing those people. And from what I understand, I'm just working on memory here, he seems to have addressed it in three ways. Firstly, he says, he's partly working the Aristotelian tradition, apparently, so he says that if examination of the physical world tells you something which is true, you can't just dismiss that and go for the scriptural reading. You have to go for what's there, because the analysis and the understanding of the physical world it brings you closer to the mind of God in a sense. It's not exactly what he said, but that's the kind of reason for it. But you do stick to the facts. You examine the world and take the truth as it is revealed to you from the examination of the physical world. So you can't dismiss truth by looking to scripture, which I thought was interesting. So when they are in conflict, you have to look at scripture in one of three ways. Oh God, I'm not sure I can remember this. But one you have to look at it as allegorical first off. So if scripture is saying something about the world which science or philosophy is in contradiction with, you have to say that the scripture is an allegory, and you have to re-enter it with in that spirit. The second thing, and this I think relates to the idea of negative theology, the idea that nothing can be said about God, everything you say about God is necessarily incorrect. The second thing you can say about scripture is that it can be in that spirit. So if God says that if scripture says that God is all-knowing, then it's oh God, I'm not sure I can remember this bit. It's you have to read that as not saying something about God, but saying something about because you can't say anything about God. It's just the silence at the centre of all expression. You can't just say anything about God. Say God's all-knowing. You have to, it says something about the existence of knowing in the world. Knowing exists. That's what that effectively says. And there is the knowing of it, and the fact that we come to know that those ideas as part of that. And then there's this third thing. What's this third thing? Oh God, I can't remember that now. Anyhow, I thought that was really interesting that he's writing in whatever it was, 10th, 11th centuries, in Cairo and other places, in this hotbed of intellectual, secular and secular's not the right word, multi-faith community, and he's coming up with this thing then that if you in order to try to resolve the contradictions inherent in the human condition as revealed through the apparent felt truths of scripture and the truths as revealed by physical examination of the world at large, the perplexing nature of those contradictions certain things have to yield and certain things have to be reappraised, including the idea that Scripture must be taken allegorically at that point. Wow, very interesting, I thought. Just dropping down off Bodmin Moor towards Truro now. Nearly there.